Greetings adventurers, and welcome to the Loot Goblin Marketplace. I didn't realize that every single video game seems to have a tabletop adaptation. Now at first that makes me a bit nervous because players may know way more about the game setting than I do. What if someone asks a question that has an established answer but I don't know it? Would I just make something up on the spot and hope that no one calls me out? Because honestly that is what I do half the time that I'm running games in my own generic fantasy world. Diving into a world where the Dungeon Master is in love with the setting but the rest of the party seems to only kind of know the world seems like a sweet spot that I'd be comfortable with. Today's story is all about the Fallout TTRPG, which you may be able to pull off just by watching the show or by playing a couple of the newer games. There are larger, more established factions for sure, but no one's going to question a random settlement you made up on the spot. Plus, you could always cover a region of the US that the games haven't covered. Let's take Detroit for example. You could use the parts that are already abandoned as your inspiration for what the entire city would look like in a post-apocalyptic world. One thing that I do know about the Fallout universe is that a lot of vaults suck to live in, but a few of them were basically paradise compared to the outside world. So how do you get everyone to leave that cozy settlement? Well, obviously something bad has to happen. Who wants cool stuff and to save lives? I'm part of Power Word Meal with hundreds of creators who are saving lives together, and you get rewards when you help us do that. 100% of donations go directly to feeding vulnerable people across the world, and everyone who donates gets this ready to play new D&D species, and we're giving away over $20,000 worth of bonus rewards to supporters at random as well. The more meals you donate, the more chances you get to receive one of these awesome extras. It takes seconds, and even if you just buy one meal, you get a ton of amazing stuff. Check it out, link in the description. Today's treasure goes by the name, ever have a game that went too well? I did, and now my players are upset with me. I recently bought the Fallout TTRPG and was excited to play it with friends. Let's call them Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. We all set a time and place to host a Session 0, as the game uses different rules and mechanics than what we're used to with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I also discovered that, aside from Charlie who tried Fallout 4 years ago, most of my friends have never played a Fallout game and only understood the setting through cultural osmosis. This meant on top of explaining how to play, I was also going to be my friend's official introduction to Fallout. With all that in mind, I cobbled together a setting and a story. I decided to have my players start as Vault Dwellers, to give a matching character and player surprise to discovering the wasteland. And what would Fallout be without vaults and Vault-Tech's many horrific experiments inside said vaults? Of course, I could start my friends in a control vault, but where's the fun in that? After a lot of brainstorming, I decided this particular vault's experiment would be twofold. First, homosexuality was not only accepted and encouraged inside the vault, but heterosexuality was outright illegal and punishable by prison or even death for repeat offenders. This social shift would be rationalized by the absolute need to control population as to not overexhaust resources. And all children born were through in vitro fertilization, except that is only the setup for the experiment. In truth, Vault-Tech had robots tucked away that were secretly manipulating the genetic codes of dwellers' eggs and sperm to see how far a human genome could be pushed and still remain viable. This would be the reason that players could have max out stats, weird quirks like green hair, or just be ungodly ugly. To get the players out into the wastelands, I planned two possible events based on how Session 0 would go. If my players want a more lighthearted beer and chips kind of game, a highly popular performer would suddenly escape from the vault in the middle of the night, and the players would be selected to go out and rescue/return said performer. If they were up for a more gritty Mad Max sort of game, the vault would be rated a la Fallout 2, with only them having survived or escaped. Session 0 finally rolls around and we all start testing the rules, building characters, filling roles in the vault, and explaining the story, themes, and concepts. Before I go further, a bit of a necessary introduction for my friends. As I mentioned earlier, my friends and I played 5th edition off and on before, so we're no strangers to tabletop role-playing games or role-playing. Out of the three pillars of 5th edition, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie enjoyed an equal balance like myself, with the favoritism for role-playing. Delta and Echo lean hard into favoring roleplay above combat and exploration, but are okay with them on occasion. My friends also prefer open sandbox games over modules or linear stories, as they don't enjoy feeling like they're forced to do things their characters wouldn't do. For example, they don't like random combat encounters when playing 5th edition, as they feel like they're being forced forced to fight something, and would rather have made the decision to engage the enemies themselves. With all that in mind, I explain that they will eventually leave the vault for one reason or another to enter into the wastelands, and about how the Fallout wastelands are filled with starving beasts, insane raiders, and other dangers. So while I can limit the combat and random fights, they will still be inevitable, to which they all say they are okay with it. Next, I asked them if they want a more laid-back kind of game or a more hardcore setting. They didn't hesitate to go for the former. Lastly, I explained life inside the vault, how their lives generally went, the struggles and problems their characters were used to, as well as the atmosphere inside the vault. Out of the 6 of us, Alpha, Bravo, and myself are straight, Charlie is bi, and Delta and Echo are gay. They are also all willing to be open about their sexuality and sexual history once they get to know you. The vault life setting presented definitely surprised them, since I'm the most prudish out of our lot, but they were more than happy to get started, especially Delta and Echo. I'll admit, once session 0 was over, I was curious as to how they would react to a world like the one I described. Would Alpha and Bravo rebel against being punished for who their characters loved or how they lived normally? Would Charlie, Delta, and Echo stand against the punishments of any straight characters and NPCs, or would they reflect the prejudice they receive in real life? Would they bring the vault's prejudice with them into the wastelands? I actually think this session 0 was held pretty well. He really seems to understand what his players enjoy and has asked some very targeted questions that he already knows how he's going to navigate come session 1. So they've opted to go for the more beer and pretzels style game. Sure, Fallout is a post-apocalyptic world, but it can be very silly at times. It's not grimdark by any means, so you can definitely play it either way. I really like how willing the author is here to play it either way, honestly. Now, based off the title, we know things are going to go south eventually, but I do think an offhand comment he made about not wanting to do a control vault is going to eventually haunt him, because essentially the vault is being treated as like the tavern that a party interacts with at the beginning of a campaign. If you make the tavern too interesting, they're going to spend all their time trying to hang out in there instead of going out and doing the actual adventure. So let's see how the author here gets things moving. Once session 1 officially started, my friends immediately took to vault life. Alpha was a doctor, Bravo was a chef, Charlie became a maintenance technician, Delta a performer, and Echo was in security. Everyone was given chances to play with skill tests, action points, and the 2d20 system. And as we were all adults, I was open to letting them have as much fun with flings, one-night stands, and whatever else they wanted to get up to inside the steel tomb of the vault. While I never allowed any actual ERP, as role-playing every encounter would have taken all day, Charlie, Delta, and Echo were excited to freely be as open about their characters' love and sex lives as they wanted, and Alpha and Bravo were more than happy playing out their lesbian fantasies. At the end of the session, the atmosphere of the vault had become that of a free love society, as long as it wasn't between a man and a woman, and it didn't interfere with vault work. And while I did have Echo and Charlie stumble across 2 breeders exchanging kisses once, they simply looked the other way. I ended the session by having the vault's star performer giving one last grand concert in front of the entire vault. Needless to say, everyone was super hyped for session 2. After 2 weeks of impromptu one-on-ones about characters, text chats about in-game events, and a surprising amount of out-of-game character building, session 2 starts. As a side note, I have never gotten my friends this invested into their characters before, so I was absolutely pumped. As the players wake up in beds not their own and are fighting off hangovers from the after-concert party, they discover the entire vault abuzz as the star performer has gone missing. And it's even rumored that they went outside the vault, but how can that be? Where would they go? The vault's been closed and sealed for hundreds of years. How did they get out? After talking amongst heartbroken fans and confused friends about the situation, the Overseer announces that the performer did indeed leave the vault, and that the Overseer was going to choose a select group of individuals through lottery to form a rescue party. And you can guess which lucky 5 individuals were selected. And here's where everything went sideways. All my friends said no, and I was thrown for a loop, scrambling to get things on track. I had the Overseer implore to them the importance of morale inside the vault, the necessary service the performer was doing for the vault, how it was their duty to help in times of crisis, blah blah blah. Again, they said no. Each of my friends gave in-character reasons as to why they didn't want to leave. Alright then, player agency and all that. If they didn't want to leave, they didn't have to leave, at least willingly. On to plan B. The rest of session 2, the vault was completely depressed. Work wasn't getting done, people would argue and rage at each other there for the slightest irritation. Some had to be literally dragged out of their rooms to perform their daily duties. They could hear the performer's songs on loop behind closed doors. Posters of the performer around were either turned into funeral memorials or vandalized. The players themselves were looked down on. How could you abandon the performer? How could they be so selfish? Didn't they care about the performer? Etc, etc. Needless to say, my friends weren't all too happy with me at the end of session 2, especially Delta and Echo. They all felt like I was unfairly punishing them for the actions they chose, and that they shouldn't be bullied into playing a way that they didn't want. I explained that they were right, I was being harsh on them, but it was the consequence of their choice. The Overseer told them how important the performer was. They were also aware of the fact that through various pictures, NPC chatter, and a giant concert at the end of session 1, how important the performer was to the vault. And since they had chosen not to leave the safety of the vault, their fellow vault dwellers viewed their characters as having openly abandoned the vault star. I also reminded them that back in session 0, I explained to them that the plan was for them to leave the vault, and that they all agreed they were okay with that. Begrudgingly, they agreed to turn back time and go after the performer. No, they made their decision, and I said I was going to respect their choice in session 3, if they would give me a chance, and if they still wanted to play, to which they reluctantly agreed. You know, I do honestly feel really bad for the author here. He did such a good job building like the tutorial settlement, the vault, that people don't want to leave it and move on to the main story. And he's communicated from the very start that this is just like a temporary situation. They're going to have to move on. Eventually, when they conclude the campaign, they might return. But man, I feel like if he had just saved all this cool stuff that the party liked because he knows what they enjoy for the first settlement they encounter when they leave the vault, most of these problems would immediately be solved, and they would defend that first settlement with their life, and it would be really easy to nudge them into certain plot points because of it. But because they're still in the tutorial, they essentially are saying, yeah, we don't want to do that wasteland thing, we just want to be in the vault for the rest of the campaign. He's honestly suffering from success here, where if he just had a very boring control vault, they would have been begging to run out of it as fast as they could to find literally anything else. Session 3. It's been several days since the performer left. The Overseer had sent out a different team. Life was returning to normal in the vault slowly. Delta and other small performers within the vault tried to pick up the slack of the star or take their place, but struggled to be accepted as a replacement. Half the vault was in deep depression, with Alpha having to fix a few suicide attempts. Charlie had to pick up the slack of their fellow workers, as they didn't see much of a point in continuing without the performer. And the Overseer gave a mandate to Echo to lock up any and all weapons, chems, and alcohol to prevent more problems. Again, there was almost no spicy roleplay for the players. There was a few conflicts to solve and a few skill checks to make, but there was very little roleplay for my players, making the sessions boring for everyone. This caused some of my friends to say that they didn't want to play since they weren't having fun anymore. I pleaded with them to give it one more session. I promised it was going to be much more interesting the next time we played. Session 4. A few more days have passed and people have moved on. My players are finally getting their groove on again with the other residents, although there are still a few who outright refuse them because of their decision not to leave. My players finally began to start perking back up and getting into their roles again. The only odd thing that happened in the day was Charlie suddenly discovered a random encrypted file on their Pip-Boy that wasn't there yesterday, to which they failed their 5 difficulty check to hack it open. After another few hours of play and a few more in-game days, everyone is about back to where they were in session 1, until that is, they hear a loud grinding noise coming from the vault door. Then blam, the vault door explodes off its roller and the vault suddenly becomes a wash of bullets, blood, and death, as crazed humans in tribal-like armor pour into the vault, heralded by a hulking suit of black power armor wielding a minigun. I give the players one objective: escape alive. Well, remember how I said my friends, especially Delta and Echo, were upset about being called out for not voluntarily leaving the vault in session 2? Oh boy, are these two absolutely livid. I mean, honestly, I can see why. You're actively massacring probably their favorite campaign settlement across any game they've ever played with you. Let's see exactly what they say though. I had betrayed their trust. They got attached to their characters in the vault, and I was just burning it all because I didn't like them having fun. I was killing their characters because I was spiteful. I was ruining a place where they could be happy. I was bullying them into playing a certain way against their will. I was a terrible GM. I was a terrible friend, and went on and on and on. Nothing I said reached them. Arguing was drowned out with angry shouts and slurs about being a homophobe. I had never seen my friends that legitimately angry at me before. Even Alpha and Bravo were miffed about what had just happened, but were still completely taken aback by the outburst. Charlie ducked their head and got out of the crossfire. It's been a few weeks, and while I'm on speaking terms with all my friends again, Delta and Echo refuse to play any TTRPG with me ever again. Looking back, I do see why Delta and Echo were angry. I had intentionally made a safe space for them to be open, appreciated, and accepted, where they could be as much themselves as they wanted to be and could be. It wasn't that they didn't want to venture into the wasteland, it was that they didn't want to leave the place they felt the most comfortable. But on the other hand, we had all agreed to play a certain game, and my players had decided without me they wanted to play something else. While it was their decision to stay in the vault, a decision I upheld, there is also no game or story if they stayed. To me, it was as if your 5th edition group suddenly said they all wanted to be blacksmiths and refused to go adventuring, but still expect you as the dungeon master to run a compelling, story-driven campaign. I also wasn't okay with endlessly flirting with my friends until they all felt satisfied or got bored. Honestly, that's totally fair. Was I in the wrong for having raiders attack the vault after my friends were opposed to leaving on their own in session 2? Or is it okay for me to feel like my friends blew the game's events out of proportion? I mean, we're still friends, it just hurts to see someone you know and care about get so angry at you. I want to start off by saying, author, by no means are you a homophobe. You did a really good job of building something that your party liked, to the point that it almost was detrimental to the health of your campaign. You know, early on, I know you said you were a bit of a prude, and later on here at the end here, you say that you weren't entirely comfortable with just flirting with people session after session. I totally get that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to avoid ERP situations at the table. There are entire discords and online forums where people can ERP their heart out on their own time. When it comes to romance at the table, I avoid it completely. It's not something that I want to spend time on. I'd much rather spend all my game time doing dungeon delves, combat, and if people are going to talk about their backstories and emotions, it's going to be everything besides flirting. Although to the party's defense, you didn't have to make the vault's premise this way, and since you did, they took it as a sign that maybe you're a little more open to exploring these kinds of topics compared to maybe the other 5th edition campaigns you've run in the past. It's like you create a scenario where you said that there's a tavern with a bunch of hot maidens in their area, and for some reason you're a little confused why they don't want to leave the tavern. You made the starting location way too appealing, man. I actually ran into this problem when I had a campaign where the party stopped at like a midway point that was an oasis in the middle of a desert. After explaining how tough it was to get to the next location and how dangerous the journey was going to be, the party wasn't exactly in a rush to leave that first session, so they talked with all the NPCs, and the NPCs I was really excited to have them role play with, and eventually they just were like, you know what, we really like it here, and they ended up making a settlement there. And honestly, I really like how you role played the random NPC chatter and like the world building of everyone getting depressed that the performer was gone. Unfortunately, you making those little nudges in game isn't going to be enough to stop a stubborn player who wants to stay there for out of game reasons, but it does seem like you have a really good knack for role playing and just building a believable world with random NPCs. It sucks that Delta and Echo don't want to play with you right now, but you sound like a great dungeon master to play with. It's really going to be their loss if they don't eventually give you a chance. It's only been a few weeks after all. I'd love to hear everyone's comments below. Have you guys encountered a situation where people just don't want to leave that first location? I've definitely run into it a few times now. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, and please donate to Power Word Meal. D&D Shorts is a great guy for putting this together, and if we hit our fundraising goal, I'm actually going to give out 6 tokens. The artwork probably looks familiar. I commissioned them from Toad, who I've worked with in the past to do the Sir Barrington and the Crod, the Angry Carpenter animations. So if the fundraiser hits their goal, I'm going to release those tokens on the Discord as an added thank you. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell for now.